How's everybody doing? All right. I have a lot of ideas to share with you all, and I'm actually doing 2 talks this weekend. So this will be the first one, kind of introducing some ideas and actually picking up on what Serena was mentioning there. And before I get into that, I do want to just kind of re-emphasize what was said a little bit ago about, I speak at a lot of different events, all types of people. I have been vegan for 12 years, but I don't really speak at vegan events. I speak at different types of things that I'm going to talk about. And every crowd I go to, I never make the assumption that we're all on the same page, even if I know, hey, we agree on this one topic. And I think that's important because I think diversity of ideas is beautiful. So I'm probably going to say some things that might trigger some people or, just challenge. And I hope that you will sit with that and see where it takes you. So my name is Derrick Broze. I've been, as I said, vegan for going on 12 years. And I think the majority of the room here is already vegan or almost vegan soon. So my talk today is about how we can build a holistic liberation movement that actually goes beyond veganism, because veganism, I think, is a component of a liberation movement, but as I said, I think it's more than that. And because I speak at a lot of different events, it allows me to dip into different crowds and kind of see where, okay, this crowd has this piece of the message, but then there's some blind spots here. We all have blind spots, right? I think maybe we could all acknowledge that. There's always room to grow, including myself. I'm not up here claiming I've got everything figured out. But it allows me to get a perspective and see, okay, this crowd understands this piece of the puzzle, but then they're totally, just harming animals. Or they've got this piece of the puzzle, but they're completely devoid of maybe the spiritual side of things. And so I want to talk about that and point out some things where I think the vegan movement could grow. Before we do that, I will give a brief intro for those who are unaware of my work. I've been an activist and an independent journalist for the last 15 years, originally based in Houston, now living in Mexico. We flew up here from Mexico, myself and my lovely partner Miriam, who will be giving a meditation this weekend as well. And our dog Pugsley, if you see him, give him a little kiss, say hi to him. So I started in Houston with activism in 2009, 2010. Protests, marches, rallies, living in a community house, community gardens, urban farms, art shows, confronting politicians. Did the whole thing until I realized that journalism was what I really wanted to focus on, and that I seemed to have a knack for putting a camera in politicians' faces and watching them run away. And so I kind of focused on that. In 2013, I started a website called The Conscious Resistance, which is where I have my documentaries, my books, podcasts, interviews, etc. And the reason I call it The Conscious Resistance is because my work focuses on the search for meaning and the sort of spiritual, internal, esoteric realm, as well as how do we build the better world in the physical realm, and bringing those two things together. So I've been doing journalism, been doing activism, as Serena mentioned. Miriam and I also host an event every January in Mexico called the People's Reset. I would love for you all to come check it out. Go to thepeoplesreset.org to learn more. 5 days, all solutions focused, permaculture, good mix of people. And in general, my life has been dedicated to how can I not only promote ideas that I think are important, but most importantly, actually embody them. One thing that I've noticed in my years of activism is that most activism is very reactionary. Like, for example, I was at Standing Rock, if anybody remembers that struggle, that resistance. I was at the, different resistance movements, going there to document, to participate. And I started to realize it's like, okay, these corporations or governments or whoever you want to point at as they're doing all these different things, and we run over here and protest, and we run over here and march, we run over here and rally, and we're just reacting constantly. We're in a reactionary state instead of being more proactive, more forward-thinking. And so a lot of my work, as Serena has mentioned, is focused on that. How do we actually build the world that we want to see? And not just in this, that phrase, it is true, but it's also become very much a cliche, just a bumper sticker, and I don't think people actually really embody it, like be the change you wish to see in the world. But what does that actually mean? And so when you start to look at your own life and your actions and your habits and your relationships, you might start to see, okay, there are some areas that I'm inconsistent. I claim to hold these certain values, but then when I actually look at the way I'm living, I'm not really living in alignment with that. So we're gonna dig deeper into that. Also, one of the interesting things that I think has been mentioned quite a bit is sobriety. Who is it saying? I guess I'm California sober, but my story prior to activism, I'll just share it really, not this weekend. I'll share it really briefly. In 2005, 20 years ago, actually this November, I was 2 years out of high school and I got addicted to crystal meth, and I got arrested the week before I turned 21, and I went to prison. And I spent 18 months between 2005 and 2008 going in and out of Texas prisons. And really, that was where I discovered meditation. That's where I started doing a lot of my trauma healing and working on a journey that continues to this day. So that was kind of my first waking up experience before I ever became vegan, before I ever became a journalist or a conspiracy theorist, which happened a few years later. My first waking up experience was really getting locked up, going to prison, starting to look at the roots of my own trauma. Why was I stuffing so many drugs inside my body thinking that was the key to happiness? What was the root of all that, right? So that was my first wake up. And then a few years later, after I got out of prison and I'm now a felon, I started to investigate and kind of question things like the drug war and the prison system and the justice system and all these sorts of things that I was now experiencing firsthand. And that eventually led me to the activism I'm doing and all the things I'm doing today. So that is a big part of why I call my work the conscious resistance and try to bring together the spiritual and the fight for freedom in the physical and the spiritual realm, because it's something that I directly experienced. And so, yeah, I think it's interesting. There's a lot of people here who have their own sort of sobriety story and journey that they're on. And in that kind of experience of getting out of drugs, and I was using a lot of hard drugs and definitely not taking care of my body or eating healthy or any of that stuff. But once I got through that and I decided I do want to get healthy, I had done some damage to my stomach. I had done a lot of damage to my lower intestine, my colon, and I had to go to the doctor and deal with all this stuff. Long story short, after I found out what I had done to my body, and they told me the answer that they wanted in their Western medicine was to cut me open, staple my stomach to my hip bone, cut me back open, then take a biopsy of my stomach, sew me back up, cut me open one more time, and all sorts of fun stuff that didn't sound like the solution to me. I asked the doctor, I was like, well, I don't even know if I have the money to do that, or if I want to do that, what else can I do? And he recommended that I go vegetarian so that I could make it easier for my stomach to not have to process meat and things like this. This was 2009, 2010, and then a few years later I became vegan. So it's all kind of interrelated, like my activism, my journey getting out of the trauma, and then starting on the path I'm doing now where I write books, I do public speaking and documentaries and all this fun stuff. But it's all kind of interrelated. And so my activism these days and my public speaking, it does take me to all kinds of communities and all kinds of events. So I speak at anarchist events. I speak at libertarian freedom-minded events. I speak at crypto events. I speak at transformational events. Like, anybody ever heard of Envision Festival in Costa Rica, things like that? So I get invited to a lot of these different communities, and I love it because each of those things has an appeal that pulls me there, right? Like, the freedom message is very core to what I believe. My foundational principle that I believe and everything else I do springs from is the belief in individual liberty. So this means, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, that even as a vegan, because I believe in individual liberty, and because I'm an anarchist, I don't believe in forcing government to make people vegan, or to ban meat, or to control what they put on their plate. I believe in a consciousness shift, and leading by example, and trying to encourage and show people, wow, this is a better way. And I believe that with all of my values, so I don't think government's the answer. And I also think that there's alternative tools out there. So back in the day, I was into Bitcoin early on, and started getting, investigating it and learning more about it. And so that got me kind of connected to these communities. I started going to speak at Envision to bring the anarchist message to the spiritual community. Started going to the anarchist events to bring the spiritual message to the anarchists. Because I could see, like I said, that there seemed to be these gaps and different groups thinking. So I saw that, like, the libertarian and the anarchist kind of minded people, the sort of anti-government, like, we own our bodies, we want to do what we want, harm no one, take no shit kind of thing. They got that message, and which I value and appreciate, but then a lot of them, they might be like, yeah, freedom, but then they're eating like crap. They're treating their bodies like crap, right? Or they don't care about the environment, or they're devoid of spirituality. They don't really see any point in that. And then I'll go to a crypto event. For example, in Mexico, we were at this event called Monerotopia, for anybody who knows about Monero. And they've got the crypto side down. They're using tools that allow them to avoid governments and banks and taxation and all sorts of important things. But again, a lot of that community, for whatever reason, there's like a huge overlap between carnivores and crypto. Very weird to me, but so a lot of them are into that, obviously not vegan, and maybe couldn't care less about spirituality or the environment and things like that, but they understand that, hey, here's this tool called Monero that allows me to avoid government and to avoid the big banks. So again, they've got some piece of the puzzle, but they've also got blind spots. Then I'll go to like a transformational festival like Envision or some of these others I've been over the years, and they're obviously kind of on the conscious tip, more spiritual. But they support government, or they don't see the violence in the choices they make. We're going to dive more into that in a second. Serena kind of already touched on that, about like how there's inherent violence in the systems around us, and when we participate in them, we become part of that violence. And a lot of vegans understand that when it comes to animals, but they might have a blind spot about how you're participating in violence in other ways. And then, you know, when it comes to, like, let's say the deep researchers, the conspiracy theorists or whatever, people who question the world, I'll say. And I think rightfully so, question everything. But oftentimes, yeah, exactly. You know, eventually you learn they're not all theories. Some of them still are, you know, we're figuring them out. But you realize, and I've realized as I've been in that space for 15 years and producing documentaries about Jeffrey Epstein and all of these kind of different things since 2015, that a lot of those people get lost down the rabbit hole, and they have no practical solutions. They become obsessed with just asking questions and just digging. And so, again, I see that there's room to grow in each of these areas. And one second while I turn my page. You guys with me so far? Yeah! All right, cool. Because now we're about to get into the fun stuff. So those are some of the communities I've run in and spoke at, and I go to events, and as I mentioned, we host our event, and we try to bring all these communities together in one crazy space and see if we can actually get along. And we usually do. We have some healthy debates, and we have some fun. And then when it comes to the vegan community, which, again, like, I'm not in the vegan community in terms of social media. Obviously, I'm here, and I'm happy to be here. And me being vegan isn't a secret. It's just not my main form of or focus of activism, although it's very deeply important to me. Vegans obviously understand protecting animals and animal liberation and animal rights, and there's some sort of intersectional causes there. But then a lot of times it seems like we might turn a blind eye to human liberation and the ways that we're participating in the systems that are oppressing humans. You know, we put so much emphasis on the animals. And to me, in my mind, it's like, well, of course, people, what you said, like 99% of people participating in systems of, you know, where animals are being mistreated, of course that's the case. Because the entire world participates in systems of violence called government that allow them to sort of compartmentalize the violence that exists in these different systems. So to me, it makes perfect sense. Of course, people would be sort of hypocritical and say, no, I love my animals, but then turn around and support systems of oppression that harm animals, because they're already participating in systems of oppression that harm humans every single day. And so, as I said earlier, my main kind of value, my main core principle is individual liberty, self-ownership, sovereignty of the individual. I think that everything else springs from that. You know, if we recognize, like if I recognize that I'm a powerful, beautiful, free person, and I give you that same extension, you are free, powerful, beautiful, I have no right to force you what to do. I can sit down, we can have a healthy dialogue, healthy conversation, but it's wrong, it's immoral, impractical, unjust for me to come grab you by the hand and say, live the way I want, love the way I want, eat the way I want, you know, act the way I want. And so I think most people would understand that if I came over here and grabbed my brother right here and started trying to force him to do what I want, you'd be like, whoa, what are you doing, Derrick? You lost your mind. But if I then turned around in November came and I said, well, I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to vote for a politician that will force him to do what I want. The violence is still there. People just sort of compartmentalize it and excuse it because, well, we like to do that sort of thing. It doesn't sit well when you realize, oh, maybe I am participating in systems of violence. And we'll talk a little further on that. My talk, again, is titled Building a Holistic Liberation Movement. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. Feel free to shout it out. What does holistic mean to you? This is a specific word. I know you guys have seen it everywhere. Like if you go out to a store, you'll find holistic dog food, holistic sex, holistic gardening. But it actually does have a meaning. There is a real definition behind it. What does it mean? Anybody feel free to shout. Holistic. What do you think of?
Mind, body, spirit.
Mind, body, spirit.
System thinking.
There you go.
Non-reductionist.
Non-reductionist. What was the other one? All-encompassing. Okay, so you guys got it. Like, so holistic that word comes from, as somebody said, dealing with whole systems, right? So rather than focusing on a single piece of, like, let's say you're studying the planet, right? Instead of just looking at the bodies of water, which is an important field of study, if you were taking a holistic perspective, you would look at the planet as a whole and see how do these different systems interrelate together. And when you take that whole systems approach or holistic approach, it changes the way you view things. So a lot of what I talk about, I call holistic activism or holistic anarchism, because again, I think it's about us not only being reactive and sort of like, well, they're the problem, but then turning the finger back to yourself and say, well, how am I participating in those systems? In which ways am I actually promoting the violence? Now, again, everybody here is, at least for this weekend, vegan and not participating in the systems of animal violence, but there might be other ways that you are participating in these systems. And what I'm going to share here in this next section is kind of a preview of what I'm going to talk about on my other workshop, which I think is Sunday. It's on the schedule. If you look up my name, it's about why vegans should embrace, exit, and build, and we'll talk about that in a second. So if we're going to take a holistic approach, though, right, one piece, which is obviously clearly valuable, is liberating animals, not participating in those systems. I mean, everybody here, I think, would understand and probably already embodies the vote with your dollar concept, right? Like, you're not going to restaurants that are slaughtering animals. You're probably trying to be selective in where you buy your food and things like that. So you get that concept, but then, again, start to look at different areas of your life. I call this a holistic self-assessment, and this is actually the process I took myself through when I went to prison. And it's also a book of mine that you can download for free at my website, theconsciousresistance.com. It's called The Holistic Self-Assessment, if you want to learn more about that. But I'll give you just a little preview of it. So here's some of the other areas that I think are important and valuable that vegans might be, and I emphasize might because, again, I don't know you, so don't take this as, a judgment. And also, again, don't take any of these things as a judgment. I think everything is all about an opportunity to raise up our awareness, right? And you can decide what to do with the information. So let's talk about the banking system, for example. You might be, protecting animals, doing what you can to help their liberation and to raise that awareness, going out and doing activism, whatever it is that you do to try to promote that. You put stickers on your car, you make videos, whatever, right? But then what about the banking system? Like, let's say JP Morgan Chase, the bank that helped Jeffrey Epstein launder money for his victims. I'm just going to throw out some real stuff here, right? Or Bank of America, the bank that helped rob the American people during the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. How many people have their money in those banks? This is not a shame anything. If anybody doesn't want to raise their hand, that's fine, but just reflect on that. How many people are supporting banks which are part of the fractional reserve central banking system, which robs people every day through things like inflation? I'm just going to dip my toes in each of these areas, so we're not going to go super deep. My point is, though, that might be an opportunity to make some changes, to say, you know what, maybe I don't want to support those particular systems. I'm going to go research the local credit unions in my area, because at least those are smaller local banks where I have more of a say. I'm going to take my money out of those big banks, which I know have done all sorts of harm. I mean, HSBC was involved in human trafficking, laundering, drug trafficking. We could go on and list the crimes of the banking system. So then you start to take steps. This isn't about like going from being in the banking system to being, out of the matrix, so to speak, overnight, but about how do you start taking those practical steps. In the same way we try to teach people to be vegan, right? You might say, like, well, you're not going to be vegan overnight. Just start doing meatless Mondays, right? Or you start taking practical steps, and then before you know it, you're vegan, right? In that same sense, you might be fully integrated into the banking system, might have credit card debt, fully into the economic financial matrix. But with some reflection, you might decide, that's not a system I actually want to support. How can I take steps to get out of that system? The big tech system. This is one that's very difficult to avoid because, well, we have major corporations which have monopolized nearly everything that we use in our digital world. If we go to the local electronics store, you're going to see Amazon, Apple, Google, Microsoft, all those usual companies. And if you want to, say, buy a laptop or a cell phone that's not with spyware built into it, you don't find that at the mainstream stores. Thankfully, there are more and more companies out there offering these tools, and we'll talk more about the solutions on Sunday. But the point is, if you don't want to support, say, Google, who is willing to build a search engine that censors things for the Chinese people, or Google and their Dragonfly AI military program, or Facebook and their censorship, or we could go on and on about the different things the big tech companies have been involved in, spying on people's data, sharing it with governments. Even if it's just as innocuous as trying to sell you another product. They're listening to us. They clearly don't respect our sovereignty, our individual liberty, our privacy, right? And yet we continue to use these tools every single day. Has anybody ever looked up or researched the suicide nets that exist around the Foxconn Apple factories? Because so many of their workers being overworked, some of them have taken to committing suicide and jumping out the windows. They had to install suicide nets around the building. These facts are out there, this information's out there. Again, this is not intended to shame anybody. The point is to level up our awareness and say, okay, well, if I don't want to support that system, what are the alternatives? As I said, there are alternatives. I'll talk more about this on Sunday, but I want to throw just a couple things out your way if you want to write these down. NoMoreGoogle.com. And I heard a brother mention earlier, and again, this is not like a shame, about like using Google to share pictures. There are other options that exist. You're just not going to hear them. Just like we all know you can't trust necessarily the mainstream media to tell you the truth. you're not going to find these things in the mainstream stores. You go to nomoregoogle.com, another one is privacytools.io, and I don't endorse any of these companies or anything like that. I'm not paid by them. These are just tools that I use. And it'll literally give you an option. Okay, if you're tired of Gmail, here's privacy-based emails. You're tired of using Google Docs, Google Calendar, Google Sheets, here's some alternatives. So for example, when we organize our event and all the things we do, we use CryptPad. CryptPad.fr is one of their websites, and it has everything that you're doing with Google, but it's privacy-based, it's open source, it's encrypted. Also, a brother of ours, a good friend, he runs a company called it's the Above Phone, but his main website's takebackourtech.org if you're looking for tips on how to get out of the big tech matrix. The point is, there's things wrong with these current systems that for one reason or another, it's typically because it's convenient, because we are creatures of habit and we do what's easy. And it's like, oh, I don't know, Derek, I got all my friends in Gmail. That's going to take so long to change my contacts. It's going to take so long to change a bank. I don't know, I guess I'll just stick with it. Now imagine you're trying to convince somebody to be vegan and they say the same excuses. I don't know, Derek, it's going to take so much effort for me to change my diet. It's so much easier just to go to all these restaurants where there's meat. And you see the hypocrisy there and you would call it out then. So maybe it's time to think about it in other areas. Educational models. This one is just simple. I mean, the school systems are built on the Prussian model of education, which was all designed to create worker bees, obedient people, not critical thinkers. But no matter which angle you think about it, the schools are filled with propaganda about history, about, everything as basic as science and all sorts of things. So I think that when you can support homeschooling, unschooling, which is obviously a luxury for some families and not capable for many other families who are struggling financially, but do what you can to try to, especially we see all these beautiful young ones here, there are people who want to shape their minds, whether that's it's okay to eat animals, don't think about the hypocrisy in that, or don't question these world events, don't question government, don't question these corporations as we get all the kids on Google Chromebooks at every school, right? There's hypocrisy built into that system, and I think we should question it. We should try to take ourselves out of it and opt out of it when and where possible. Food. Now this is the obvious one we're talking about, veganism. So everybody here is vegan or not vegan yet. But there's things like we could go further, right? I'm sure most people here, and again, this is not about shaming. It's convenient to go to a vegan place where it's highly processed and it's got all the oils and good stuff, and it's tickles that part of your brain. It's this is vegan fast food, but it's still vegan. I know it's not really healthy for me, and probably is super processed and got all kinds of things in it. I can't even spell the names or say them, but it tastes good, right? So veganism is still, I think, just a beginning on the health food journey. Who here is familiar with permaculture? Yeah, permaculture is the other key when it comes to our food, because if you're going to take care of the animals, veganic permaculture is becoming more and more of a recognized thing as well. Permaculture is to me, when I think about it, it's okay, so I believe in self-ownership, individual liberty. Like I was saying with my brother here, it's I'm not going to use force, fraud, coercion, violence on him because I know that's wrong or immoral. And I apply the same things to animals. And I try to apply the same thing to the way I interact with the earth and with the planet, right? So we don't want to support destructive food distribution, production systems which are wasteful, unsustainable, and obviously the most part they harm animals. But even if they're not harming animals, they can still be destructive and wasteful. And so if you're not familiar with permaculture, I encourage you, there's so many amazing permaculture teachers in the world, free courses, free documentaries out there. Get to know it. Find your local community farm, urban farm, community garden, get involved, get your hands in the soil, because I think that's the next level, right? Being vegan and respecting the animals is a piece of it, but how do we go even beyond that? And then this gets to the fun one here. So as I said, I kind of touched on this a moment ago about how there's inherent violence built into governmental systems. And this is, we're not here to get deep into the world outside of what's going on right now, but let's just be real. If you're in America, the corporate parties, both sides, do not have the best interest of the American people or the people of the world in general. And so if you think you're voting for one side to get back at the other bad side, you're still participating in an evil system, and a system that is inherently broken. And here's one way to think about this, right? So taxation is, some people would say theft, I think it's more accurately extortion. Because even if we say well, I'm going to fund these awesome schools or we're going to fix roads with taxation, it's still taken from you involuntarily. Because if you don't pay your taxes, we all know what happens. Eventually, they're going to come show up with men from the government, backed by the guns of the government, either police officers or IRS agents, and say, hey, you didn't pay your fee to live here on this planet, And if you don't do it, we're going to take everything you have and eventually we'll put you in jail. That doesn't sound consensual. And I know that we all here care about consensual relationships and voluntary relationships, right? Here's another example of that. Through involuntary taxation, vegans are funding animal atrocities. Because you have no control what they do with that money. They might take it out of your pocket and they promise it's going to something good. You're going to get it in Social Security later, we promise. Don't think about it too hard. It'll be there, we promise. And at the end of the day, you have no control over it. So your taxation, your money that's taken from your hard-earned money that's taken from your pocket could go to fund some pipeline you don't support. Could go to fund, some subsidies for the dairy industry, which there's a lot of those. Like there's so many different ways that it's interconnected to that. And by supporting government blindly and just accepting that this party or that party or whoever or a third party, by doing that, we're going to somehow get to this better place. But I think this, as I was saying earlier, this kind of goes back to the root of it. Why are people willing and able to accept violence to animals? Well, because we've already normalized violence through the system of government itself that compels people to participate under the threat of violence every single day. And this is why, I said I'm an anarchist. Another word for what I consider myself would be a voluntarist. Has anybody ever heard that? Yes. So the key word there is voluntary. This means and most people probably are voluntarists or anarchists, they just haven't really thought about it too logically, and it's a scary word because of propaganda. But who here believes that all relationships should be consensual? Voluntary, consensual, congratulations, you're a voluntarist, right? Like there might be some details there to work out, but that's all it really comes down, is you're a person who says like, look, I want every relationship I have to be consensual, voluntary, I don't want there to be force, fraud, coercion involved. Right now, we are all having a voluntary relationship. You're all choosing to sit here, nobody's got a gun next to your head saying, sit here and listen to this crazy guy talk. You're here because you want to be, even if you agree with me or not. And we're engaging, right? But as I said, when it comes to government and situations like that, it is anything but voluntary, anything but consensual. And until we actually get to the root of that and recognize that, I think we should expect to see systems of oppression like violence towards animals and the crazy systems we have right now continue. It all comes back to that for me. And so the solution to this, which I'm going to be talking more about on Sunday, is what I call exit and build. Exit from the systems that do not align with our values and build the ones that actually do reflect our values. Instead of marching and protesting and yelling at government buildings or being reactionary, the reactionary activism, start thinking holistically, okay, how can I unplug from these systems that I don't agree with and try to embody and live the things that I do believe? And it's not easy. It's a lot harder to then going and pressing a button and voting for a politician every 4 years and outsourcing your power and saying, okay, please, I did my part, I voted, I got my sticker, now somebody else will take care of the world for me. I can go about and look at me, I'm a good person on social media. But in reality, it's a little bit more difficult than that. It takes changing yourself, it takes looking at your relationships, your habits. And I'm not saying let's aim for perfection, but maybe we aim in that direction and we get somewhere better, right? I mean, we at least strive towards building that better world. And so I will be diving more into this since I've identified some of those systems, the banking, the media, the big tech, education, food, and government. How do we exit from those systems? What does that look like? And what does it mean to build something new? Because I don't believe the solution we're going to find, whether it comes from veganism or for any of the other problems I mentioned, is going to come from government. I think it will come from the moment each of us reclaim our sovereignty, our self-ownership, we recognize that in other people, we come together, and we focus on building the parallel systems of the future. That could mean you build a vegan community. You want to embody that and show people, yes, it is possible to live healthy and to be a happy vegan without harming animals. People only believe what they can see. So let's embody the things we believe in. Let's not wait for somebody else to do it for us. Let's take the idea of voting with your dollar, apply it holistically, and let's build the better world we know is possible. Thank you, guys. Thank you. I'd like to end, if I could I'd like to end really quickly. This is something I shared at the end of all my talks and all my videos. It's just an affirmation that came to me while I was in prison, and it's something I've used for a number of years. If you feel inclined, if you resonate with it, please feel free to repeat after me. And thank you again for your time. I am powerful.
I am powerful.
I am beautiful.
I am beautiful.
And I am free.
And I am free.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Derrick.